That morning, the water was so still, it reflected the sky like glass. Somewhere else, children lined up to enter a cave that had long been considered completely safe. And thousands of miles away, a professional diver was preparing for a mission he had done many times before. None of them felt like they were in danger. There were no warnings, no alarms, no obvious reason to turn back, only a familiar and comforting thought. Everything was fine. Yet inside each of these enclosed spaces, there was one small detail that didn't quite belong. Something that, once missed, would leave no chance for correction. 3 people stepped into 3 very different places, unaware they were approaching the final boundary of control. What happened inside, places that seemed so harmless? They brought a guideline, but they chose the wrong kind. On the morning of April 14, 1990, Troy Spring looked like a sheet of dark blue glass. The water was clear, still, and appeared completely harmless. It is a massive freshwater spring, releasing approximately 96 million gallons of water every day from the underground aquifer, a constant force that never stops. Beneath that calm surface lies a deep underwater passage, where water is forced through a narrow run with enough power to push even highly experienced divers backward. Clarence and Richard were young cousins. They were comfortable around water, familiar with hunting and outdoor life, but had little to no experience in cave diving. Their plan to dive Troy Spring was not a secret. Family and friends warned them, urged them not to go, told them this was not a place for people like them. Those warnings were ignored, not out of arrogance, but because everything still seemed fine. They prepared using what they had. 1 air tank each, no secondary regulator, a spool of fishing line to serve as a guideline. At the time, it felt like a reasonable choice. At approximately 9:15 a.m., they entered the water. To reach the run at Troy Spring, they had to descend to roughly 70 feet. At that depth, the water does not flow sideways. It erupts upward from the ground, compressing everything inside that narrow space. They secured the line at the entrance and moved forward. At first, the dive unfolded as planned. The current was strong, but manageable. Then, about 55 feet inside, a small detail began to shift out of place. One diver's regulator began to free flow. Air poured out continuously. Bubbles thickened, clouding visibility. Breathing became difficult. Respiration accelerated. Panic set in. The second diver had no backup regulator. The only option was to pass the working regulator back and forth in that powerful current. Every exchange meant a few more seconds of lost control. The water did not wait for them to fix the problem. The current began pushing them backward. Instead of escaping, they were pulled into their own guideline. The thin fishing line twisted under tension. It did not hold their path. It held them in place. Every movement tightened the line further. The current forced them downward. The space to manage the situation disappeared. Control slipped away, moment by moment. By the time they understood what was happening, there were no options left. They were held underwater, not because the air was gone, but because they could not surface. Both men drowned while the spring continued to surge from the earth below. At 10:07 a.m., less than an hour after the dive began, their bodies were discovered. When recovery divers reached them, it took 10 minutes to cut through the line to free them. The investigation found no single fatal mistake, only a chain of small deviations. Inexperience in cave diving, improper equipment, the wrong type of guideline, possible nitrogen narcosis at depth, and an environment that offers no forgiveness to those who enter without fully understanding it. There is no conclusion here, only a question that lingers as the story moves forward. If they had chosen the right equipment from the start, would they have survived to tell this story? The most experienced person was the one who didn't come back. On the morning of May 5, 2022, Sassanage Cave opened as it did on any other day. It is a tourist cave with defined routes, professional guides, and a reputation for being safe for first-time visitors. For Sabine, the cave was familiar ground. She was 55 years old, with more than 30 years of experience in outdoor and nature sports, and had been guiding tours in this cave for decades. That morning felt no different from hundreds of others before it. The group that day consisted of school children. They were divided into 3 smaller groups, entering the cave at staggered times to avoid congestion in narrow passages. Each group was accompanied by guides. Everything followed standard procedure. Outside, rainfall was heavier than expected. But in this region, spring rain is common. The forested terrain usually absorbs excess water quickly. No official warnings were issued. There was nothing to suggest the cave would become dangerous that day. As the groups moved deeper, lower passages felt damp earlier than usual. Water began appearing on the cave floor more quickly. But in caves like this, small changes in water level are not unusual. It wasn't enough to stop the tour. Then the water began to rise faster. Not by steps, but by minutes. A flash flood formed upstream, feeding directly into the cave system. Low passages that had been dry moments earlier started to fill. The first 2 groups managed to exit in time as the current strengthened. They left just before the main routes became difficult to pass. For the final group, timing worked against them. Sabine remained at the rear with 2 other guides and the accompanying teacher. She was checking the students as the water flow intensified. During movement, one child slipped and lost her footing. Sabine turned back. Without hesitation, she pulled the child clear of the rising water. The action took only seconds. Immediately afterward, the current took Sabine. There was no warning, no time to react. She disappeared from view almost instantly, dragged into the flooded passages. The others could not go back. The current was too strong. Their only option was to reach higher ground and wait for rescue. By that afternoon, emergency services were mobilized. Approximately 30 rescuers, including cave divers and local emergency teams, entered the system under extremely difficult conditions. Late that night, the remaining 2 guides and the teacher were brought out safely. Sabine's body was found earlier, in a lower section of the cave. All of the students survived. Afterward, no procedural failures were identified. There was no evidence that Sabine had violated safety guidelines. Only one fact remained unchanged. The person who stayed behind was the one who did not return. If Sabine had not turned back to save that child, what would have happened to the rest of the group? Marcy was 42 years old. Within Hungary's cave diving community, he was not known as a risk-taker. Quite the opposite. He was regarded as one of the most cautious divers in the country, a multiple national champion in navigational diving, an international medalist, and someone trusted with the most demanding expeditions. For Marcy, risk was not something to challenge, but something to control down to the smallest detail. Kossuth Cave was that kind of environment. A complex cave system explored over decades, containing multiple siphons fully submerged underwater. Every movement inside depended on guidelines, mapping, and strict discipline. There was no room for improvisation. On April 3, 2022, Marcy took part in an exploratory dive at Siphon 3. The objective was not to set records. It was simply to extend the guideline a few more meters, a task he had performed many times before. Routine work, well within his capabilities. Marcy entered the water. He did not return. When the report reached the surface, Andras, the head of the Hungarian Cave Rescue Service, received the call. There was no panic in the voice on the line, only the controlled urgency of a serious situation. 3 cave rescue organizations were mobilized almost immediately. Initial reconnaissance revealed something wrong. The tunnel at Siphon 3 had collapsed. Clay and rock debris blocked the passage completely. What had once been a clear route was now a solid barrier. As rescuers reviewed footage from helmet cameras, a small detail stood out: a metallic object partially buried in sediment. It appeared to be the edge of a scuba tank. Hope emerged, fragile but real. If it belonged to Marchi, it meant he might have passed beyond the collapse. The following day, Andras and Victor re-entered the system. Visibility was nearly zero. The water was cold. The passage was narrow. Andras could not get past the collapse. Victor continued alone. Approximately 30 meters into the siphon, Victor saw Marchi. He was trapped at the narrowest section of the tunnel. His body was positioned as if he had been on his way out. All equipment was intact. There were no signs of a procedural error. Based on the position of the body and the condition of the tunnel, investigators later concluded that the ceiling had collapsed as Marchi was exiting. There was no equipment failure, no breach of protocol, only a geological event occurring at a moment that allowed no escape. Recovery operations began immediately. They lasted several days, through each siphon, one section at a time, until Marchi was finally brought out of the cave. When his body reached the surface, rescue team members lined the exit. A siren sounded for 1 full minute. No one spoke. Marci's funeral was held in Budapest. Those in attendance understood one thing: some deaths are not caused by mistakes. They are the result of being in the wrong place, at the wrong time, inside a system that offers no second chance. 3 people, 3 circumstances, 3 different levels of risk. What happened did not unfold in the same place, nor did it follow the same chain of mistakes. Some lacked experience. Some followed every procedure correctly. Some were careful to the point of missing nothing. But inside enclosed spaces, they all faced the same reality. Not every death has a fault, and not every disaster can be prevented. Places like Troy Spring, Sassanage Cave, and Kossuth Cave are still there. They did not disappear after the tragedies. They continue to exist as natural systems, carrying the memory of those who did not return. Within cave diving and exploration communities, these names are no longer just locations. They have become markers of the limits of human control. There are places where you are only allowed to be right once. In caves, there are days when you do everything right, and still, you do not come back. So when faced with environments that offer no second chance, should humans continue to push forward, or learn to accept that some boundaries are not meant to be crossed? If you want to keep exploring stories where people reach the final edge of control, stay with us for the next chapters.